Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Cutter One. I am your host, Jay Just Jay, your resident troublemaker and your resident culture warrior. All right, so the previous episode to this one was about a feminine centric, a feminist view of the Two Towers. And it came out a couple of days ago. Because on Sunday was on the 18th was the 20th anniversary of the Two Towers, of Peter Jackson's The Two Towers. So a lot of articles came out. Also at the same time, we have the article that we're going to be looking at today. So let's get right into it. This is coming to us from Den of Geek from Juliet Harrison, and it says, Lord of the Rings, Arwen should have stayed at Helm's Deep in the Two Towers. Liv Tyler's Arwen was famously cut out of the Battle of Helm's Deep in the Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. In retrospect, this was a mistake. All right, so right out of the gate, we know where we're going, right? We are going to retroactively fix Peter Jackson's adaptation. Let's get right into it. When The Two Towers was released in December 2002, it was fairly common knowledge among J.R.R. Tolkien's fans that screenwriters Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens had initially planned on putting the character of Arwen at the Battle of Helm's Deep. It would have been a major change to the books, and more than just consider the concept, Jackson even filmed. Oh, and more than just consider the concept, Jackson even filmed scenes with the actor Liv Tyler there in complete armored regalia. And even now, several eagle-eyed YouTubers have spotted moments in the final cuts of the film where Tyler can just about be seen on screen from a distance. However, the filmmakers changed their minds, and Arwen was removed from the sequence while action scenes were reshot. In fact, Arwen's entire character arc in the film was altered, a decision that was greeted very positively by a large number of people, not just fans of Tolkien's books, but even Tyler herself on the movie's DVDs. But looking back with 20 years of hindsight, we think maybe Arwen at Helm's Deep was quite a good idea and could have worked pretty well. Here's why. Books, movies, and the process of adaptation. Books and movies are different forms of media. Well, that's good. And they have different requirements. Whoa. It is impossible to simply take a book and put it on screen. You have to adapt it. Okay, so far we are batting 1,000. This requires making certain choices, and where every reader might visualize something in a slightly different way, you have to choose a visual interpretation and stick to it. And you have to change things, because sometimes what works in a novel simply doesn't work in an audio-visual medium. Okay? Some adaptations are closer to the books they are based on than others. TV series are often able to be very close to the books because their extended running time allows the inclusion of more subplots and more detail from the novel. And it is certainly possible to change too much in an adaptation, to the point where the result bears little resemblance to the source material. Where have we seen that? The Witcher? No. No. I guess we haven't seen that. The BBC's 2021 series, The Watch, which was inspired by Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels but bore very little resemblance to its source material, is a good example of something that isn't so much an adaptation as an entirely new story with some similar character names. I swear I've heard that before about something. I just can't place it for the life of me. I have no idea, but I know that's a very familiar concept. However, in general, the process of adaptation will involve making some changes to the plot and characterization of the source book while often ensuring the film still represents the spirit of the book. This is something fantasy readers have become more used to in recent years, partly thanks to the popularity of adaptations of George R.R. Martin and Neil Gaiman's works. Changes made to the early seasons of Game of Thrones and to season 1 of The House of the Dragon have often been praised as improvements on the source material, as have some of the changes to Netflix's The Sandman. But authors have experience in Both authors have experience in screenwriting as well as books, and both are usually involved in productions based on their works, explaining to fans that they support some of the changes being made and that certain choices work better on screen than others. Some changes have also been made because they wrote the original books in the 1990s, and attitudes have shifted in the years since. But it was still the late 1990s when Jackson and company were scripting their Lord of the Rings adaptation, and at the time there was a lot of concern around the idea of making changes to Tolkien's beloved book. It is also fair to say that there are a particularly large number of Tolkien fans who dislike any changes at all being made to Tolkien's books, perhaps because Tolkien's son and literary executor, Christopher Tolkien, felt that way and did not like Jackson's films. If you listen to the director's and writer's commentary track on the Two Towers Extended Edition DVD, the three writers talk constantly and defensively about every change they made to the book and why they made it. It's clear that deviating from Tolkien's text was a huge concern for everyone involved. And of course, Tolkien himself, who was perfectly willing to change an entire chapter of The Hobbit to better fit The Lord of the Rings and changed his mind about his own plots on a regular basis, was sadly not around to discuss their choices. Arwen at Helm's Deep. In a featurette in the extended edition DVD box set, several members of the cast and crew explain at length why Arwen was initially included in the Battle of Helm's Deep and why she was taken out of it again. Jackson and company had decided to have a group of elves join the Rohirrim in their defense of Helm's Deep, a change from Tolkien's book that does remain in the final film. Jackson explains that he thought it was, quote, somehow a romantic notion that the elves would give one last piece of assistance to the men before they leave, unquote. Boyens also talks about how it honors the spirit of the last alliance of men and elves, and points out that the elves in the books were fighting in Lothlorien and Rivendell. The books briefly mention these battles, but they do not show them. So for the films, it made sense to send elvish troops to a battle already being filmed rather than mention a new one off screen. Jackson goes on to talk about how Arwen had been intended to fight at Helm's Deep as well. Originally, Jackson said, we thought that's a great opportunity for Arwen to reappear and to have another connection between her and Aragorn, because our real problem was geography, that we had a romance where the two characters weren't in the same space. Boyens agreed, adding that early on they had been worried that studio executives would not have gone for a story in which the hero and his love interest have a psychic connection. Ultimately, Jackson concluded, our solution was to bring Arwen with the elves, have her part of Helm's Deep. Yet making a change and then standing by it are two different things. The Two Towers producer Barry Osborne revealed on the movie's DVD that he recalled vividly when a rumor got on the internet that Arwen would be at Helm's Deep. There were a lot of objections to that thought from Tolkien fans, Osborne said, and for her part, Tyler recalled that she cried after reading some of the online comments referring to her as Xena Warrior Princess. Okay. Yeah, I had something I wanted to say, but I'll sort of hold off. No one on the DVD featurette spells out exactly why they changed their minds, but they do show footage of Tyler working on fight scenes and explain that it was while shooting the Battle of Helm's Deep that they decided it wasn't working and they were going to go in a different direction. Boyens said, now that we've managed to come back to the book, what we discovered is that the love story could be more unconventional, that you could, in fact, tell a story as written with these two main characters being apart from each other because they were always together. Tyler describes the second half of shooting as being when they came back to who Arwen really is, and explains how happy she was about the changes, saying, you don't have to put a sword in her hands to make her strong. Remember that. The problem with Arwen. Tyler makes a solid point about how a strong female character does not have to be a warrior. But The Lord of the Rings does have such a female character already in Galadriel, whose warrior background, as briefly implied by Tolkien and expanded upon in The Rings of Power, is not shown in the movies. And the fact remains that there was a reason the writers wanted to put Arwen at Helm's Deep in the first place. Aragorn and Arwen's love story is a challenging one to adapt. In the books, as well as being geographically separated from everyone else, Arwen does almost nothing and has no character arc. Aragorn and Arwen's love story is mostly told in the novel's appendices, which go into their background, their falling in love before the events of the book, and what happens to them afterwards. In the main text itself, she shows up and looks pretty in Rivendell, and then turns up at the end to marry Aragorn, almost like an elvish reward for his heroism. This obviously would not work in a movie trilogy in the early 21st century. Arwen desperately needed a character arc of her own, a discernible personality, and some kind of involvement in the main plot to make her reunion and marriage with Aragorn a satisfying conclusion for the audience. Jackson and company had already brought her more securely into the plot of the movies and given her something to do in the Fellowship of the Ring by having Arwen, instead of the elf Glorfindel, bring Frodo to Rivendell. Even Ralph Bakshi, whose earlier screen adaptation was so desperate not to change Tolkien it included unnecessary details like a 17-year time gap, replaced Glorfindel in this sequence with a character more significant to the story, Legolas. So what are you saying? Glorfindel's not a important character? Only if you haven't read the books. But I digress. As a consequence of the change, Tyler's Arwen is far more proactive, writing with Frodo, having something reasonably substantial to do to further the plot, and perhaps revealing some of the strength that first attracted Arwen when she refuses to fear the ring wraiths. But once the Fellowship leaves Rivendell in the movie, Arwen's lack of story becomes a problem again. In the final version of the trilogy, the writers use a combination of flashbacks, deleted scenes from the Fellowship of the Ring, in which Aragorn and Arwen appear to break up and Aragorn believes Arwen to be sailing away with the elves, and an implied psychic connection between the two to keep their love story alive in viewers' minds. Arwen's character arc is spread over the second and third films. In The Two Towers, she decides to sail to the Undying Lands. Then, in The Return of the King, a vision of her and Aragorn's son prompts her to stay after all. The story in the finished films isn't altogether bad, but it isn't the strongest plotline in the movies either. Arwen's story is told in fragmented bits and pieces across two very long movies. When she returns to Rivendell, the writers have her inexplicably become ill because her fate is tied to the ring, prompting Elrond to reforge Elendil's sword Narsil into Aragorn's sword Andoril and take it to Aragorn, and giving Aragorn an extra bit of motivation. But since the fate of the whole world is at stake, the extra factor was hardly needed. And in the books, he has Andoril from midway through Fellowship. That's true. We wholeheartedly agree with Tyler that a female character does not need a sword to be strong, and being motivated by a desire for love and children is completely valid. But what compelling characters do need is some kind of arc and agency. In the final version of The Two Towers, Arwen decides to leave Middle-earth, a radical departure from the books where she doesn't contemplate that idea at this stage, and that's it. Once she has made the decision to stay in Middle-earth in The Return of the King, she just lies around looking unwell until the movie's resolution. The decision not to have her bring Andoril to Aragorn instead of her father is especially strange, since that would have given her some kind of role in the story's conclusion, beyond motivating male characters. We don't know exactly what prompted the removal of Arwen from Helm's Deep, but the hostile reaction of fans online seems like it may have been a factor. With the benefit of hindsight, reacting to this online outrage does not feel like the necessarily best approach. For one thing, it's absolutely mystifying why anyone would think a character having some similarity with Xena is a bad thing. Xena is a cultural icon and one of the DCEU's most successful movies. Wonder Woman. Oh, and one of the DCEU's most successful movies, Wonder Woman, has taken some clear inspiration from Xena. Okay, I thought they were saying Xena was DCEU. I was like, what? It's possible that objections to Arwen being depicted as a warrior also stemmed from concerns about making Arwen and Éowyn too similar, especially as Éowyn wants to fight at Helm's Deep but is told not to. But Éowyn's big fight scene comes in The Return of the King, and if Arwen was at Helm's Deep, it would be easy to write her out of the latter battle of the Pelennor Fields by simply having her injured at Helm's Deep and sending her home to recuperate, which may have been the plan. And Arwen and Éowyn come from completely different cultures and are not even the same species. Éowyn's background is a male-dominated human society, whereas Arwen's elven female ancestors rescued men from Sauron, Luthien, escaped murderers trying to destroy their whole family, Elwing, and led rebellions, Galadriel. What? Éowyn is one of Tolkien's most complex characters, and we would never take anything away from her. But movies don't need to be restricted to one sword-wielding woman, and Arwen fighting with her fellow elves takes nothing away from Éowyn's latter bravery in disguising herself as a man so she can fight with Rohan. What could be gained from putting Arwen at Helm's Deep? Putting Arwen at Helm's Deep removes one change from the book, dramatizing her choice to remain on Middle-earth and then giving her a mysterious illness, and replaces it with another, including her in the elven forces at Helm's Deep along with the other elves. We can't help feeling that Jackson and company's initial instinct might have been right. If Arwen came with the other elves to Helm's Deep, we could have seen her and Aragorn interact while under pressure, beyond the brief glimpse we get near to Rivendell. Éowyn would have met and interacted with Arwen, providing a rare opportunity for two women to talk with each other in these films. The cutting out of Arwen from Helm's Deep also caused the removal of a sequence in which she went to Galadriel in Lothlorien to ask for help. We would also get a stronger sense of Éowyn's despair and loneliness when she realizes Aragorn will never be interested in her romantically. Most importantly, it would have given Arwen a role to play in the larger story. Her decision to leave Middle-earth and then to change her mind and stay really affects only herself, Elrond, and Aragorn. Sure, she prompts Elrond to bring Andoril to Aragorn, but she doesn't even bring it herself. If the writers had stuck to their original storyline, Arwen would have gone to Lothlorien, persuaded Galadriel to send troops to Helm's Deep, and therefore saved our heroes there, except Haldir, by giving them enough troops to hold out until morning. She also would have taken part in the fighting before being forced by injury to leave again, something that would actually fit Tolkien's theme of the pain of lingering war wounds, seen in Frodo's continuing pain from being stabbed at Weathertop and from being poisoned by Shelob. She would be an active participant in these movies rather than a side character whose story flits in and out of the films and who exists primarily to motivate men. She's a storyteller, freelance writer, an ancient historian, and a lifelong Trekkie whose childhood heroes were J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. All right. There's a lot there. Okay. I'm calling BS on all of it. First of all, Galadriel leading a rebellion. Okay, I got nothing there. Okay. There's a couple of things here. First of all, I don't think Peter Jackson and the production people, I don't think their removal of Arwen from Helm's Deep was, as the article tries to imply, based on backlash from the fans. Okay, again, this is where we're going to. It's them toxic fans again, right? I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think what Peter Jackson and the rest of the production heads realized was that if you have Arwen at Helm's Deep, you undercut, okay, strictly from the audience's perspective, you undercut the value of Éowyn's "I am no man" moment. Okay, because think about it. If you have Arwen come through and even, like according to this article, sustain some injury where she has to go back and heal, right? You've already shown this woman figure as being in there and being in the thick of things as the outcome of Middle-earth is being decided, right? And I think if you have Arwen having that moment in the Two Towers, by the time you get to Return of the King and Éowyn's moment, it's diminished because it's just like, oh, we're doing this again, right? That's how audiences would have viewed it. They would have viewed it like, oh yeah, well it was the elf chick in the Two Towers, and now it's the human woman in the Return of the King, and it would have undercut it from a storytelling perspective. It undercuts the significance of Eowyn's story arc. And I think Peter Jackson and Fran and the whole head team, production team, realized that would be the case, that you would undercut Eowyn's story in major ways by having Arwen fighting at Helm's Deep. Now, Arwen was given Glorfindel's role in getting Frodo to Rivendell and stuff, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And yes, it is a change from the books, but it's not a change that overall has any sort of major negative impact on the story. And I think most fans are okay with that. If there are Peter Jackson's adaptations, he does change some things. Everybody knows that. Fans know that. But he doesn't change the overall course of the story. He doesn't change the overall nature characters in the story. His changes are subtle. They're usually external things, like Sam and Frodo being in Osgiliath when in the books they're not in Osgiliath. You know, but it doesn't change the overall characterization of Sam and Frodo, and it doesn't change the overall story, right? It's just something that they needed to do for production reasons, right? And I think the Arwen thing was another one of those issues where they wanted to give her more to do because, and like I said, in the books, she's barely there. She's literally little more than set dressing, right? So I understand the want to get Arwen more in front, but at the same time, I don't think that Arwen deserves to be put more in front simply because she's a woman, which is sort of what this article implies, right? It's sort of what this Juliet Harrison is trying to imply, is that they should have kept her there because it would have made her a strong woman, right? And I don't think that that's the case. I actually do think Peter Jackson and them made the right decision in not having her be there. Again, because it would have undercut Eowyn's story tremendously. That entire fuck yeah moment that Eowyn gets wouldn't have been a fuck yeah moment if Arwen had already had a moment like that in the Two Towers at Helm's Deep. People would have been like, oh, cool, okay, she's a strong woman too, right? And yeah, I don't like, I don't know, this article, just the tone of it is and I got to question whether or not it was based on the input from the toxic fans, because now remember, this trilogy was filmed roughly in 1999 and 2000. Remember, Peter Jackson filmed the three films simultaneously. So that would mean roughly in the time period from 1990, late 1998 to 2000, because the Fellowship came out in 2001, right? The internet isn't what it wasn't back then what it is today. Because I was kind of like, well, how much impact could fit? The internet was there, sure, in the late 90s, but not to the extent that it is today, right? So just to put it in perspective, when the Peter Jackson's trilogy was in production, like let's say late 98 through 2000, Facebook did not exist. Twitter did not exist. Reddit did not exist. The OneRing.net, okay, was still a year or two out from existing. I think the OneRing.net was started as just like a random forum board. I want to say 2000, maybe 1999, but I could be wrong about that. So like, you would have had to go looking for commentary about your film, right? People talking about your adaptation of Tolkien's work. because again, it's not like there would just be Twitter where you could just at somebody, right? It's not like there would be Instagram, right? Where, you could just post a story and it'll get disseminated far and wide. There was no Facebook, right? So there was no Facebook, no Instagram, no Twitter, no Reddit, no, OneRing.net, right? So like literally you would have had to find on some like bulletin board, and go searching around for some Tolkien bulletin board, right? So I question how much the fans' input was, because remember, according to this article, and it sort of implied that that the fans may have had something to do with it, which would have meant that the fans were talking about it while it was still in production, to the point where the fans were talking about Arwen being at Helm's Deep while they were in production of Arwen being at Helm's Deep. It doesn't make sense, right? So I don't think that that's the case. I think later on that could have been the case. And I certainly think today that could be the case, but I don't think at that time that was the case. But regardless of that, I think the real reason is because, and again, this is something that somebody who writes an article like this will never admit, is that if you gave Arwen that strong, powerful, I'm a woman of agency moment, the cost of that would have been diminishing. I'm sorry, if you gave that to Arwen in the second film, the cost of that would have been diminishing Eowyn's moment of that in the third film. But that's just my take. I don't agree with what this author, Juliet Harrison, had to say. I just think it's another way of taking pot shots at Peter Jackson's adaptations and Tolkien's work himself. Because women. Again, you see how this is all starting to coalesce now? All women directors for season 2 of Rings of Power. We've got, a lot of articles now on the 20th anniversary of the Two Towers about Eowyn and Arwen and how they were laying the groundwork for the strong, empowered, tempestuous woman that is Galadriel. You see how it all sort of starts to play in together? And this is what I constantly keep telling you guys about. Like, these people don't do this stuff on a whim. There's a method to their madness. It's a sort of death by 1,000 cuts process. Okay, I'm just the guy who's pointing out the cuts. So, but let me know what you think. Do you think, here's the question, do you guys think that Arwen being at Helm's Deep would have undercut the importance and the value and the oh shit factor of Eowyn's I am no man moment in The Return of the King? Do you think one would have diminished the other, or do you think you could have had them both and both of them be equally impactful? Right? That's the question. I want to see. I want to see what you guys have to say. I love seeing you guys break out the facts on stuff like this. So let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Remember, if you like the video. If you feel like sharing the video, that would be awesome. Get the word out there. If you have not subscribed, I would hope that you would consider subscribing. We are trying to build this thing up and keeping it moving. And if you have subscribed, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming back to check out another video where I probably pissed off a lot more people than I had anticipated. And you're still here, and that makes you a beautiful badass. All right, guys. Until the next one, be good, be safe, be awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Questions left. There were a lot of phase 4. So, Andrew, if you're ready.